Hello everyone, Redbeard here. Today we have a massive video for you which provides a grand vision for a Dwarf rework and final DLC. We will be covering units, lore, mechanics, locations, characters, and of course, Josef Bugman himself. Timestamps are placed for your convenience to value your time here. So, without further ado, there are many famous dwarf ales and many renowned brewers, but the name of Josef Bugman stands as a paragon of quality. His family originally came from the Dragonback Mountains. The tale of Josef and his ancestors is one of hardship and loss. And from their story comes the ancient dwarf phrase, "There's no beer as bitter as its history." Though Josef Bugman's ancestors moved into the lands that would later become the Empire, they lived for a few generations in the Grey Mountains. Dwarves are reluctant to talk about such things to outsiders, but it is the understanding of these scholars that Josef's ancestors were involved in some part with the founding of Kragg Norn. While little can be gleaned from our libraries, Kragg Norn is remarkable amongst the holds of the dwarves for the fact that its first ruler is believed to have been a queen. History has, alas, forgotten her name. An excerpt by Kragg the Holy and Nigel of the Stills from The Dwarves of the Empire, A Brief History. Bugman's ancestors were members of the Dragonback clan of Ekrend. Josef's father, Zamnil, set up the family trade in the eastern forest of the Empire. He built a stout brewhouse near the village of Westerberg, where the crystal-clear waters of the River Soul cascade down from the foothills of the Grey Mountains. In order to sell his ale more readily in the Empire, Zamnil took the name of Samuel Bugman, and when his son was born, he called him Josef. If Josef ever had a proper Khazalid name, it was never recorded. Josef Bugman is the most legendary master brewer of all time. This is really saying something, for dwarves take their ale seriously, and there are many famous brews and renowned brewers. Still, the name of Bugman stands as a paragon of quality. After inheriting a brewing operation in the southeastern empire from his father, he began operating what would become the most renowned brewery in the known world. His beers, such as Bugman's 6X and Troll Brew, were served to the likes of the Emperor of Man and the High King of Kara's Angkor. However, at the height of his success, disaster struck. While returning from a delivery, Bugman arrived at his brewery to find a smoldering ruin. The goblin warlord Git Guzzler had raised his operation, carrying off all of its living inhabitants to an unknown fate. Then and there, Bugman and his companions swore a mighty vengeance on the goblin raiders and set off to destroy them and rescue their kinfolk if they could. Only rumors of Bugman's exploits have been heard since. He may launch a cunning night raid on a goblin encampment, save a dwarf patrol from a greenskin ambush, or appear with a dwarven army on the eve of a large battle against a horde of orcs. His rangers tend to keep to themselves, sitting around the campfire, hands clasped around their tankards of their precious ale. Bugman has ceased to pursue only those goblins who raised his brewery. His vengeance is now upon any member of a greenskin race, orcs, goblins, or hobgoblins. Although many believe the dwarf was forever ruined by the attack on the brewhouse, he in fact keeps many secret hidden caches stocked with ale and other equipment. Bugman bears a large rune-covered axe, an ancient heirloom of great prestige handed down to him from his father Zamnil. It bears a rune of cleaving and a rune of fury. The old ranger won't reveal its true name, but refers to it as Old Trustworthy. He also always is carrying a tankard, a family treasure. Any who quaff from the tankard are engulfed in remembrances of the glorious past. It is said that as long as it is held by a Bugman, the tankard never empties. After a long haul upon its contents, the drinker feels refreshed and restored. Bugman also has been known to be equipped with a chainmail shirt, a helmet, a crossbow, and a shield. So in battle, Josef Bugman would act as a healer with missile attacks, adept at keeping the army going and shooting single entities. though as a Gromrel armored dwarf, he would still be tanky in melee combat. On foot with his rangers, he would have the stalk and snipe attributes. He would eventually unlock a unique Alecart mount, though perhaps based off his tabletop model with 2 kegs. An idea I had was maybe you could mount a ballista on this, but more on that later. Looking towards campaign, I believe an array of mechanics could come with this DLC, but first we need to talk about an FLC update to dwarves that could be a part of Thrones of Decay as well, but is more essential for Josef. This update would focus on constructing the underways and reclaiming the lost dwarf holds, which I think would work in tandem. For the underways, it would work similar to how undercities work for Skaven, vampirates, and the Changeling. For dwarfs though, your undercities are for your own settlements. You would have regular construction, then you click the undercity button to open 4 construction panels with unique and powerful buildings that can buff your faction in a plethora of ways. In doing so, also blocking other factions like Skaven from building their undercities. On screen now you will see 4 buildings and the details for them that I would like to see in this undercity mechanic. The first being a sort of railways, which increases underway stance campaign movement range for you and your allies. This could be within the region, adjacent regions, or adjacent provinces, respectively. Crossroads would be the opposite. It would hinder enemy underway movement and possibly construction in adjacent provinces. Vault stores would boost economy, trade, and settlements themselves, including growth. Mine stations would focus on bolstering your armies for battle in the region, with things such as reinforcement range, ambush success chance, and may also come with summons of miners. Now, perhaps you upgrade these buildings through multiple tiers of construction, or perhaps like in a great mod I was able to play, there's a system similar to the geomantic web from the Lizardmen. Building undercities in adjacent regions and provinces can strengthen your commandments, and perhaps even the buildings themselves. Either way, these buildings should be limited to 1 construction slot for minor settlements, and 2 for default province capitals. They should feel very powerful when you start connecting them together, which leads us to reclaiming the lost dwarf holds. An even bigger piece missing from the dwarves, there should be at least 24 settlements on the Immortal Empire's map that are designated as dwarf holds. For Bugman's faction, they may work like the Warriors of Chaos Fortresses, in that these are the only settlements that he can occupy, forcing to give any other settlements to a vassal, similar to how Warriors of Chaos do it for Norska. On screen now, you will see a map where the red X's are the Dark Fortresses, and the blue X's are my recommendations for possible spots for dwarf holds. For the other dwarf factions that are not Bugman, there should still be major incentives for taking these settlements and holding them. Dwarf holds would have many construction slots, think Skaven Blight, but would also be the only settlement you could build all 4 underway buildings, which by itself would be quite powerful. They would also be the anchor points in strengthening the connection of this geomantic web-esque system. On top of that, each should have a unique landmark which boosts the faction in a fitting way to which the hold is known for. On top of that, I think every legendary lord should get their own unique building that can be built within the holds. For Bugman, it would be a brewery that may buff casualty replenishment rate and give ranger summons and general buffs like recruitment rank. Ungrim would buff slayers, Grimberluxen would buff engineers, and so on. So this is my vision of the dwarf rework that would complete the fantasy of reviving a dying underground kingdom. Which brings us to Bugman's faction mechanics. Whilst my grand plan for Joe may be more than anything CA would conceivably create, I wanted to illustrate how rich he could be, and ultimately why he needs his own dedicated DLC. Yet, all his mechanics exist within these 4 lords already in the game. First, let's look at Nakai, as I think Joe should absolutely be a horde with an innate vassal faction, who, as mentioned before, can only settle himself in dwarf holds, similar to Warriors of Chaos fortresses. All other settlements would be given to the vassal. Henceforth, I will refer to this faction as the Ancestral Reclaimers, or Reclaimers for short. I understand the Defenders of the Great Plan still probably need a rework, but perhaps the Reclaimers can help in that process, as they should function similarly. There is one key difference the Reclaimers should have from other generic dwarf factions though, that being they would have an additional construction slot in their undercities. So, 2 for minor settlements and 3 for capitals. This would both help Joe as a horde faction and put emphasis on connecting the holds underways for his campaign. Additionally, you could have the temple aspect from Nakai, but instead of the old ones, you venerate the ancestor gods, the most suitable being Grugni, Velea, and Grimnir. This could potentially be an idea for Grombrindle as well. Same as Nakai, when you gift a settlement to the Reclaimers, you would dedicate it to a god for special rewards. For Grimnir, for example, you would unlock Troll Slayers, Giant Slayers, Goblin Hewers, Slayer Pirates, and Doomseekers in the ROR recruitment pool, and additional recruitment slots for, say, Dragon Slayer and Thane heroes. For Velea and Grugni, you might unlock a number of certain units into the ROR recruitment pool similar to how these Slayer units can. For instance, Velea might get Rangers or any of the units at the end of this video for the ROR pool, and recruitment slots for Brewmaster and Rune Priestess heroes. Grugni may get Iron Drakes, Gyros, and perhaps even the Thunder Barge itself. For recruitment slots, Runesmith and Master Engineer heroes would pad everything out. Next, we will look at Alarielle's lingering regional effects. Known as the Power of Nature, it lasts for 10 turns after she has left the region, providing a myriad of buffs. For Bugman, I've renamed it to the Merriment of Ale, and it would work much in the same way. It could provide increased control and growth while reducing corruption. Instead of influence, it could provide both gold. Instead of Winds of Magic, it could provide casualty replenishment. But the real kicker would be the chance to reinforce allies in the affected regions directly with Bugman's army. So no matter where Bugman has gone off to, there is a 50-50 chance he can reinforce in affected regions. 50-50 would make it noticeable, but not overpowered, I believe. Who he should be able to reinforce is debatable, but certainly your own armies and settlements, including the Reclaimers. It probably should include all allied dwarves, or allies in general. Of course, the player should be able to opt out of these battles should they wish, though. I think this reinforce mechanic would be super fun and thematic for Joe Bug. It would tie in greatly with the Dwarf rework in Nakai-esque mechanics. These next mechanics would stand apart, but could still be very worthwhile. If there is any lore that should get a mechanic similar to Marcus Wolfheart's Hunters, it's Archaon with his lieutenants. Check out the Nurgle vid in the top right where I briefly talk of the lieutenants, and I may remake an old video I did on Archaon at some point as well. But while making this video, I realized Bugman has 4 named unique heroes with tabletop models, rules, and magic items to boot. After the sacking of Bugman's brewery, they were said to be carried off by goblins to a fate unknown. This alone is great incentive for potential gameplay. If the lore wanted to reflect they were all killed, then they could simply act like Angren's ancestors. Ethereal heroes that Bugman would just start the campaign with, as Belegar does. But it could be so much more, as a reskin of Wolfheart's Hunters. Perhaps the campaign opens where Joseph's quest for vengeance against the Greenskins began. You are traveling home upriver in the Empire on a barge captained by a dwarf they call Deadeye, when Captain Skabend, a goblin pirate, ambushes and sinks your vessel. Surviving this, you pull yourself onto shore and see grim Deadeye Grunson being carried away by the enemy, unconscious and missing an eye. You muster what few survivors you can and set out to rescue the quirky captain. After taking your first settlement and possibly gifting it to the Reclaimer's vassal, you unlock the quest battle to unlock Grunson as a hero. Your rangers have spotted the captain and his captors moving through the forest in a nearby mountain valley. They have set an ambush and await your command. Imagine the Chaos Dwarf quest battle where you have to protect the convoy from getting destroyed, but flipped, so that you are attacking a pirate barge protected by the River Rats Goblins, led by Skabend. A small river cuts the map in a grassy valley. The hills rise around the river bend and are heavily forested, perfect for hiding rangers. The Reclaimer's rangers are already engaged with the enemy on the far side of the map when the battle opens. Do you try to save what few of your allies remain, or hang back to set up a more favorable ambush? The river bends around the map and can only be crossed by bridge at certain points. Not to mention enemy reinforcements will be attacking you from the sides of the map in intervals. Once Skabend and his forces have been killed or routed, then the barge can be stopped, effectively rescuing grim Deadeye Grunson. Due to the lore, he makes the most sense as the first hero to introduce to this mechanic, as he was with Bugman at the time of the attacks. When Grunson's barge was sunk, Bugman's other companions were defending their home, the brewery. They fought valiantly but were unsuccessful in stopping Git Guzzler's master plan, and the brewery was sacked. The companions' whereabouts are unknown. It is up to you, Josef Bugman, to seek them out by killing greenskins and reclaiming the lost holds. Once you've completed all the missions, each hero will give unique rewards to bring with you into the final battle. Git Guzzler would be the mastermind and final battle of this mechanic, but I believe has no place as a legendary lord when we are still missing a forest goblin lord such as Snag the Grobspit or Tinnet Four Eyes, and orc lords such as Gorbet Ironclaw and Gorfang Rotgut. The Guzzler is extremely similar to Grom the Paunch, so no. He could be a pseudo-legendary lord that Grom can confederate, though if introduced through a Bugman DLC as such, he would essentially be a reskin of Grom on foot that can drink brews to go into a mushroom-induced trance. He is wrathful and has a beer gut. He would lead factions such as his own Troll Beaters, Skabend's River Rats, the Sour-Faced Goblins led by the Shaman Grabnat's Sourbelly, and the Red Tooth Bandits led by Grotsnag the Wolf Rider. Before the proper attack on the brewery, Git sent Grotsnag to waylay the caravan of alecarts led by Bazrak Bulgan on the Old Dwarf Road. Grabnats was sent to destroy the watchtower Skaggy Threxin was in command of, using a concoction of explosive fungal brew. Both were able to escape and join Durzak Dragonback, warden of the brewery, in the final stand. A re-envisioning of this battle, where Bugman is able to reinforce the brewery before it falls, could be a great finale for this mechanic. To wrap up, let's just talk on what these heroes can do. Bazrak Bulgan is an old expatriate of Ekrend who survived the Goblin Wars. He is known for his enormous belly and temper. His finest brew is strong and is said to fortify and fire up any dwarf who drinks it. His battle axe is inscribed with a rune of striking and a grudge rune. Grim Deadeye Grunson was a boatman. In his younger days, Grim was an engineer of Barak Var. However, he was kicked out of the guild for his odd habits, such as drinking engine oil and wanting to build wooden ships. Upon leaving the guild, he became a bargeman in the Empire, working on a barge known as the Sea Hawk with a group of fellow dwarves. His crew of sea dogs could be a variant of Slayer pirates. He also had a telescope, which should give him spotting for hidden enemies, accuracy, and a bound sniping missile. Durzak Dragonback was a young but mighty dwarf who was experienced in fighting greenskins and inspiring his fellow clansmen. As Joseph was away on delivery, it was he who commanded the ill-fated final defense of the brewery against Gate Guzzler's goblin horde. His helm and banner were ancient heirlooms of the Dragonback clan from Ekrund. The helm was inscribed with a master rune of Gromril and 2 runes of iron. The banner is said to be woven from the braids of priestesses of Alea centuries ago. Skeggi Threxson, like Bazrak Bulgan, is an expatriate of Ekrund. He was a friend of Joseph's father, Zamnil, and they developed their aim with a crossbow hunting in the forests. He lost his eye battling orcs, but this would not diminish his skill. After establishing the brewery, Skeggi would go live life as a mercenary and trader for many years. He would eventually return to become one of Joseph's most trusted lieutenants. His axe, Forest Hewer, is an heirloom inscribed with runes of might, fury, and speed. There is no generic ranger hero from tabletop, but I imagine him being a hybrid of the other 3 companions, but with the stalk, snipe, and woodsman attributes. Enough on the companions, though. Let's move to the final possible mechanic, brewing. Much like Grom's Cauldron was reskinned for Mother Ostankia's hexes, we could have a Bugman's Brewery Mechanic. Bugman's 6X, Troll Brew, Bugman's Dark Choice, Dark Bitter, King's Gold, and Bulgan's Finest are all examples of named recipes that could be used. This would be very thematic for the campaign, but at least to me feels less interesting than the others we've gone through. Now that I've beaten the bug to death, let's move on to the other characters, mounts, and units that should be included in this DLC. As far as missing characters go, Kragg the Grim, for me, seems like the best choice for this DLC's legendary hero. Now, technically, he's a 1600-year-old Rune Lord, and rarely emerges from the underhalls of Karazakarak. We've pulled and tweaked characters like Astrogoth, Rapunzel, and Snickich from worse, and arguing this would be trivial. As a beardling, Kragg learned under Morik Furrowbrow, previous Master Rune Lord of Karazakarak, and forged his first Rune of Stone in 892 of the Imperial calendar. Kragg is the oldest and by far the most powerful living runesmith, a gnarled old dwarf, strong and enduring as a weather-beaten oak. Despite being more than 1,000 years old, his expression is one of eternal disapproval. His beetling brow and granite-like face a withering condemnation of younger, more frivolous dwarves. This is quite normal for a dwarf of his age, who has seen many wonders and watched the inevitable decline of craftsmanship and respect. Runesmiths come from all over the dwarf realms to sit at his feet and listen to his wise words. He knows many of the secrets of ancient days, long forgotten by others, and is a living link with near legendary past times. Kragg's hammer bears Kragg's master rune. This will be the old runesmith's greatest legacy to the dwarf realms when he releases it. If he ever does, Kragg devised his rune to aid him when forging. It heats up the hammer till it glows red hot, and then transfers the heat to whatever it hits. It also drives the hammer forward with crushing force. The hammer is so hot that any enemies affected by fire are affected by the hammer as if it were actually burning. Kragg has also inscribed the rune of smiting and rune of fury on the weapon. Kragg's armor is forged from heavy Gromril. Over the years, the Rune Lord has labored long and hard on it, turning each separate component into a lovingly crafted work of art. It bears the master rune of adamant, the rune of spell eating, and the rune of resistance. His rune staff is ancient and made of oak, adorned with the skull of a minotaur, which Kragg slew while still a youth of just 100 winters. The skull has been coated in brass to preserve it. The staff bears the rune of the furnace, the Rune of Spellbreaking, and the Rune of Passage. For our generic lord, we would have a Demon Slayer. After Guildmaster Engineers, a Slayer Lord is the last lord we really need for those Ungrim Slayer campaigns. This Demon Slayer should be his generic counterpart, wielding a two-handed great axe, since he is supposed to fight demons. Having magical or fire attacks would be a great boon. Otherwise, he would assuredly hit like an AP anti-large truck. Unlike Ungrim, though, he would likely have little to no armor. For his skills and abilities, he should focus only on making him and his slayers into powerhouses as they fulfill their oaths. Dragon Slayers, as I spoke of in my last video, would be the generic hero version, and should fight with dual axes to mirror the progression of Troll Slayer to Giant Slayer, Dragon Slayer to Demon Slayer. For this DLC, though, Brewmasters make the most sense as a generic Bugman hero. Just like Joe would give heals, leadership, and other support buffs to the army, armed with an axe, crossbow, and tankard, he strolls into battle or sitting atop his ale cart. A jack of all trades, master of none, this hero should feel welcome in any dwarf army, no matter the composition. Additionally, if we could be so lucky, we could have Rune Priestesses of Alea as a generic hero, though Rune Priestesses share similarities to Brewmasters. The ladies, though, are the better healers. They are also close to Runesmiths in how they operate in battle as pseudo-casters, though Runesmiths gather winds of magic and strike it against their anvils. Rune Priestesses have their runes stored within their staves. Additionally, some or all of the Priestess runes would be different to what Runesmiths and Rune Lords can cast, essentially giving us a new, quote-unquote, magic lore. Which brings me back to Kragg the Grim, who wields a smith's hammer in one hand and a priest's staff in the other. Surely, by now, you see why I think he would be perfect legendary hero material. He would wield all the runes of smiths and priests, and would be the best of both potentially. Which brings me to mounts. Shield bearers should be added as FLC, alongside the update, as they probably should have been in the game since 2016 already. Oathstones should be a part of that, since they are essentially a reskin. Shield bearers could arguably be available to every single dwarf character in the game. It essentially just gives you more mass for melee, and should be available to any and or all melee-centric characters, generic or legendary. The Oathstone should be the upgrade available to runic-centric characters. The runes inscribed on the stone provide a leadership battery to nearby allies. Both mounts should be low-level unlocks. Ale carts would be exclusive to Brewmasters and Bulgin, with Josef having a unique double keg cart like the tabletop model. It would provide additional uses of a Brewmaster's abilities and decent maneuverability. It would essentially be a Fast for Dwarves chariot at around 60 speed. Perhaps to be closer to the Grudge Pony variant, the ale cart could have a modified bolt thrower on the poor pony's back for a decent missile attack. The Grudge Pony should come with the ale cart because, again, it is essentially a reskin. The variant would focus more on refilling ammunition of your other units, and the crank drill would give it the ability to attack structures and the proper attributes for such. This could be a potential mount option for any and all engineer characters, though as I mostly laid out in my engineers video, they ought to already have a few mounts coming their way. Check top right. Ale carts and grudge ponies could be more than mounts, though, as standalone units, which brings us to our next section. Moving away from mounts, what units belong in this DLC? I talked about how dwarves could get a sniper similar to Giselles and Crane Gunners already, but what if in a Bugman DLC they were reimagined as a ranger-themed unit? This would mean more entities and less range, but also attributes such as stalk, snipe, and woodsman. Additionally, it would be nice if Bugman's Rangers had a great weapon variant to be up to date with tabletop. Continuing with the theme though, there's an old hammer unit called Mountaineers that I think would be hilariously perfect and unique. They utilize mountaineering tools such as snowshoes and ice picks, but are mostly depicted wearing skis and wielding blunderbusses. They are the rangers who live highest in the mountains and have adapted to such a lifestyle. In tabletop, they had the Yodel of Doom rule, which makes foes quake and flee in terror when they hear a frenzied pack of dwarfs yodeling as they ski charge towards them. They are also said to use alpenhorns, which is probably not pertinent to the game, but adds to their awesomeness. In Total War, there is an underlying mechanic that registers whether or not your units are moving and fighting uphill or downhill. It could be interesting if you could make this affect the speed of a unit who relies on skis to skirmish their enemies. At standard, they should move fast for a dwarf, similar to slayers at a speed of 40 to 50. They would have attributes such as woodsman, strider, and stalk. They would be best used ambushing, then cycle charging, as they would essentially act like miners if forced into sustained melee combat. Though not as essential as some of these other units, it may be the spice needed for a perfect Bugman's brew. Doomseekers I see as a potential centerpiece unit for this DLC. Similar to how I propose Wrathmongers for Khorne should work, I think Doomseekers should be an aspiring champion style unit, having a dozen or so entities that whirl themselves into an absolute meat-blending lawnmower tornado. Extreme destruction and disruption against groups of enemy infantry. Like other slayers, would wear magical tattoos in place of traditional armor, but would be far more crazed. Their animations would make them difficult to hit in melee, best dealt with from a distance. There is a great mod that adds them as an ability for slayers similar to Night Goblin fanatics. I believe though that the community would prefer Doomseekers as their own elite unit, a cut above giant slayers. Between my Dwarf DLC videos, I've laid out enough units and characters to fill out the Slayer portions of the roster, so we can finally have a proper Ungrim campaign with full and varied armies with a little more nuance than just run in, kill and die. Additionally, whilst playing any Dwarf campaign, the new Slayers could randomly be added to your recruitment pool, as the current ones do occasionally. The full Slayer roster would look like this: Ungrim Iron Fist as Legendary Lord, Malachi McKyson as a Slayer Engineer, Legendary Hero, Gotrek Gurneyson really ought to be reworked to be a Legendary Hero, which could come with any update, along with Felix, the Green Knight, Krell. Demon Slayers would be our generic Lord, Dragon Slayers a generic hero, our current units being the standard Troll Slayer and upgraded to Giant Slayer. With new units, we would have the Doomseeker as a champion style unit, Slayers with pistols, aka pirates, as a ranged unit, and Goblin Hewers as an artillery unit. I've never really gotten through an Ungrim campaign because it just feels like there's so much Slayer content missing. With all of these additions, I can finally have that perfect Ungrim campaign. Now we move away from the traditional infantry that dwarves are known for and onto monstrous units. But Redbeard, even the mention will surely get your name written in the book. But nay, I say, for it is possible I've thought of just about every microscopic detail of this DLC. The construction of rune golems was among the pinnacles of runecraft and engineering, but the knowledge and schematics to create such automatons is lost to the dwindling dwarves. Perhaps then this unit would only be available to Thoric Ironbrow's expedition, or to Kragg. The Norse dwarves never developed gunpowder or advanced machinery, as through history they were cut off from the World's Edge Mountains. They maintained much of the runecraft that those other clans would lose though. Perhaps once you unlock Kragg the Grim as your legendary hero, you can then recruit the golems from Tier 5 settlements for other factions. Or perhaps certain rare runic and engineering units can only be recruited from one of those 30 or so major dwarf holds on the map. This could include any of the engineering units included in my engineer video, or any of the monstrous units in this one. This again would further incentivize any dwarf faction to reclaim the lost holds. But back to the unit itself. Rune golems are heavily armored, ogre-sized constructs shaped in the likeness of a dwarf. Early on, they were animated completely by powerful rune magic. The first to create one was said to be none other than the ancestor god Thungni himself. The last to animate one was Renald Silverthumb, Rune Lord of Karazakarak during the War of Vengeance. To do so required the aid of other Rune Lords and turned him into stone, similar to Chaos Dwarf sorcerers. Later, it is said runesmiths were able to collaborate with engineers to make similar constructs that relied on a complex system of cogs, levers, and pulleys that would baffle the greatest engineer of the Empire. Old Hammer might suggest that there were even steam golems powered without runes completely. So in that, I see 4 potential variants of these units. A standard runic golem, which are monstrous infantry constructs, between ogres and Ushabti, with a dozen or so in entities. They would have passive or bound runes from runesmiths or rune priestesses. Perhaps they could have a system to make different runic loadouts with your golems, as lorefully they can have 1 master and 3 other runes inscribed into their exterior. As they should be rare, prerequisites such as an additional building or high expenses would be necessary. On the other hand, to make them more available, there could be a Steam variant that is only stripped of the cool runic loadouts. This could even be a mechanic exclusive to Thoric. Guardians could also have runic or Steam variants, but they are more Iron Giant sized, so think of a single entity construct like the Terracotta Sentinel, but in the likeness of a dwarf. Then potentially add runic loadouts. Getting a few of these guys with the Rune of Wrath and Ruin in one army sounds like ripe cheesy fun. Boom! For any of the 4 variants, most are depicted with modular hands for weapons in the form of axes, hammers, and drills, though ranged weapons such as drake guns, crank guns, bolt throwers, or cannons could be jolly good fun too. For our final unit, some would say a dragon in the dwarf roster? Preposterous. But the Shard Dragon is not quite a dragon. A Shard Dragon is an enormous serpentine beast which prowls the black depths of the mortal world, stalking its prey in the abject darkness, pulling themselves silently over rock and shale on disturbingly prehensile, sickle-clawed arms. Their pale flesh is covered by long, jagged scales, each razor-edged and wickedly pointed. Coated in blood and decaying viscera, these protective plates are as much a weapon as a defense, slicing flesh and puncturing the armor of those foolish enough to confront such creatures in battle. Shard dragon scales are pale, but even if that generally implies white, it is hard to describe a near colorless being such as these creatures. Creatures as much living nightmare as bestial predator, there are those lore masters among the Dawi that claim that shard dragons are not true dragons as such, but the devolved remains of some draconic offshoot that migrated into the dark heart of the known world. Untold centuries in the lightless umbra have filled them with malign power and distorted their forms, and some are now venomous enough that they burn the very rock beneath them, while others are able to exhale the vaporous essence of soul-destroying terror to silently slay their prey. And should they be overmatched and injured, the Shard Dragon will explode into a murderous rage that few creatures could survive. It was the dwarfs that first returned these creatures to the light of the sun, having learned to bind shard dragons with powerful runic collars and turn them upon their foes to rend and tear. Learning of their power, ambitious wizards, now long dead, soon created binding scrolls so that they too could harness the Shard Dragon's strength. So in Total War battles, they would have a host of features. Their Gromril Hard Razor Scales would not only give them a high armor stat, but also an ability similar to the Jabberslythe, where if units are caught in melee with it, they will be taking damage over time. The Breath of Nightmares would, of course, be a breath attack, but it may induce terror as well. Their Rock Melting Venom might go along to the damage over time ability, but additionally would give them poison attacks. Their Rabid Frenzy would mean they would have the Rampage rule, but maybe it's more sort of like a Berserk, where from like Khorne or Norska, where yes, you go into a rampage, but you will get additional weapon strength or melee attack. Obviously, they will need to have a runic collar, or else they could not be controlled by the dwarves. The proper name would probably be a Yoked Shardworm, similar to the Carnosaur, which is also controlled by a runic collar, which may also mean you buy Shard Dragon recruitment from the Forge mechanic. Perhaps the non-yoked version would be available to the Chaos Dwarves or some other chaotic faction. It is also likely to be renamed to Worm, as it is not a true dragon similar to Kislev's Frostworm, though the Shard version lorefully would probably make a poor mount. I didn't see the Frostworm mount coming either, so feels like something that would rightfully go in the book, though. Lastly, their animations should be similar to the Frostworm, where they slither along the ground and cause a lot of disruption, but may also go in and out of the ground like a Tomb Scorpion does. We do also have a named Regiment of Renown, La Phantasma. This massive shard dragon could expel a deadly poisonous fume that caused bouts of fear so intense as to kill. It was sighted in the caves of Trafuro and the city of Tabaro. There is also an item that might come to the game along with shard dragons. The Thirsty Stone is a pure ruby, often set into a ring or amulet. It is taken from the heart of a great shard dragon such as La Phantasma. Created by magics first perfected by a Bretonnian duke, this stone seems to absorb any blood spilled upon it. In return, it grants the wearer magical wards against attacks from every kind of creature. However, the Thirsty Stone is insatiable. If the wearer starts bleeding, the stone begins to feed on them, attaching itself to their skin like a leech. Until the stone is forcibly removed, the bleeding cannot be stopped. To end the video, now that I've talked about both of the DLC lords I think the dwarves need, let's review starting positions. In my Engineers for the Thrones DLC video, I predicted Grim Berlikson would start in Karak-Azorn in the Mountains of Morn. This puts him equidistant between the Chaos Dwarf Lords, perhaps for a short victory. This also puts him close enough to places like Zufbar and Barak-Var, perhaps for the long campaign victory. Recently, it was data mined that location is getting more construction slots, leading people to believe the prediction I had is accurate. The Spine of Sotek was Thoric Ironbrow's start in the Warhammer 2 Eye of the Vortex map. I've mentioned it would be a sensible alternate location for Grim, though. The most loreful start for Josef Bugman would be in the Grey Mountains or Southern Empire, though this is pretty close to other dwarves such as Belegar. I'm sure for Chaos Robbie's Old World map, this location will work fine. For the Immortal Empires, and the mechanics for my grand vision of Bugman, perhaps somewhere else though. By the time we get Bugman, perhaps the lands of Ind will have been added. For the Mountains of Heaven, the tallest mountains in the world, would be a wonderful start position for any dwarf, like Bugman. From here, you need only start heading west to start reclaiming Lost Dwarf holds. Of course, I think dwarves deserve an 8th legendary lord, as all Game 1 and 2 base races do. This 8th should be an FLC lord, which I plan to make another video for. Karak-Azul lies in the southern world's Edge Mountains province and should probably remain a pseudo-legendary faction. Kragg, though, easily has the most FLC potential. Stay tuned for the next Dwarf video.